The hall was silent. Rows of polished seats gleamed under the soft glow of chandeliers, and hundreds of faces turned their eyes toward the stage. At the podium stood a man in a tailored suit, his presence commanding but humble. The room buzzed with anticipation, the kind reserved for someone important, not a celebrity, not a politician, but someone whose story had become larger than life. That man was Marcus Reed. And as he gripped the sides of the podium, his eyes softened. He didn't see the wealthy donors or the flashing cameras. He didn't see the respect and admiration he had earned. He saw something else entirely. He saw a 17-year-old version of himself, standing on a street corner, pockets empty, fists clenched, and heart full of anger. He saw flashing red and blue lights reflecting off shattered glass. He saw himself chained, head down, being led into a cold, gray prison block. He saw the boy who had been written off by the world before he ever had a chance to prove himself. He leaned forward, his voice steady, but charged with emotion. "People ask me all the time," he began, his deep voice carrying across the room, "how a man like me ended up here. How someone who once wore an orange jumpsuit now stands before you wearing this suit. The truth is, the story isn't easy, and it isn't pretty, but it's proof of one thing, that your past doesn't define your future. What you do with the pain, the mistakes, and the struggles, that's what defines you." The audience hung on every word. Marcus paused, letting the silence fill with weight. Then he asked the question that had once burned in his own mind, a question he now posed to everyone listening. What would you do if the world told you that you were nothing but a criminal, that you'd never be more than the worst thing you'd ever done? The room was silent. You could hear the faint hum of the air conditioning, the rustle of a single chair shifting. Marcus straightened his shoulders, and for a moment he looked down at the paper in front of him, though he didn't need notes. He had lived every word he was about to say. "To answer that question," he said, "let me take you back to where it all began." Marcus Reed was born in the late 1980s in a neighborhood most people avoided after dark. Rows of dilapidated apartments with chipped paint and broken windows lined the streets. Streetlights flickered, casting long shadows where danger lingered. At night, sirens became a kind of lullaby, and gunshots were not uncommon. He came into the world already behind. His mother, Althea, was only 19 when she had him. She worked double shifts at a diner, serving greasy food to customers who barely noticed her existence. His father? Marcus never knew him. He was a ghost, a name whispered once and then gone, swallowed by the streets and his own demons. Life in that apartment was survival. The fridge rattled louder than it ever kept food cold, and meals were often whatever could be stretched the farthest: canned beans, day-old bread, powdered milk. The heater rarely worked in winter, and Marcus remembered nights when he and his mother huddled together under thin blankets, her arms wrapped tightly around him, whispering promises she couldn't keep. "One day, baby, it won't be like this. One day, we'll have more." From the time he could walk, Marcus understood scarcity. He understood the sting of being the kid with worn-out shoes, the boy who never had lunch money, the child who smelled of the grease from his mother's diner uniform because she had no time to change before hugging him. He remembered the sting of other children's laughter when his stomach growled during class. But he also remembered the fire that grew inside him. Even as a boy, he wanted more, not just for himself but for her. He would stare at her tired face, her hands raw from scrubbing dishes, and think, "One day, I'll take care of you. One day, you won't have to work like this." Dreams, however, don't pay rent. By the time Marcus was 10, he was already running errands for older boys in the neighborhood, carrying bags, delivering envelopes, sometimes standing lookout on corners. He didn't always understand what he was part of, but he understood the rules. Keep quiet, do what you're told, and maybe, just maybe, you'll earn a little respect. School was supposed to be an escape, but for Marcus, it was just another battlefield. Teachers overlooked him, classmates mocked him, and every failure felt like proof that he was destined for nothing. Yet, deep down, he still clung to the small sparks of ambition. When a teacher once asked the class what they wanted to be when they grew up, Marcus had quietly whispered to himself, "Rich." Not famous, not powerful, just rich enough so his mom wouldn't have to struggle anymore. Adolescence came quickly, and with it, the crushing weight of responsibility. At 12, Marcus started working after school to help his mother. He bagged groceries, swept floors, anything that would put a few extra dollars in the jar they kept hidden in a kitchen cabinet. But it was never enough. Rent always swallowed the jar whole, leaving nothing but loose change. By 13, the streets had their claws in him. Older boys noticed his hunger, not just for food, but for respect, for belonging. They gave him nicknames, slapped his shoulder when he did a good job, told him he was family. In a place where his real family was just him and a mother too tired to notice, that kind of attention was intoxicating. But with that belonging came risk, and risk quickly turned to danger. At 14, Marcus was arrested for the first time. Petty theft. He and 2 friends had stolen candy, soda, and chips from a convenience store. To Marcus, it had been a game, a way to feel bold, to feel like more than a kid who never had money for snacks. But when the flashing lights came and the cuffs clicked shut, reality hit hard. His mother's tears that night burned into his memory. She didn't yell, didn't scream, she just looked at him with a disappointment so deep it cut worse than any words could. "I worked so hard to keep you out of this life, Marcus," she had whispered. "Don't you see? Don't you understand what happens to boys who go down this road?" He did understand. But understanding and resisting were 2 different things. The streets kept calling, and Marcus kept answering. Yet, even in those years of turbulence, Marcus had moments where the dream flickered. He would walk past the tall buildings downtown, men in suits carrying briefcases, cars polished to perfection, and he'd wonder what it felt like to live like that, to not fear eviction, to not eat dinner out of a can, to walk into a store and buy something without counting crumpled bills twice. One day when he was 15, he passed a bookstore while wandering the city alone. Something about it stopped him. Maybe it was the warmth spilling from the lights inside. Maybe it was the smell of paper and ink when he pushed the door open. He didn't know why he walked in, but he did. He ran his fingers over glossy covers, bright titles, words he didn't fully understand. He couldn't afford anything, of course, but he lingered. And in that moment, surrounded by knowledge he didn't yet possess, something stirred in him. He wanted to know more, to be more. But wanting and becoming, those were 2 very different battles. And for Marcus Reed, the war was only just beginning. By the time Marcus turned 16, he had 1 foot in 2 different worlds. One was the world his mother prayed for, school, a future, a chance to escape. The other was the world that had already claimed most of the boys his age, the streets, with its fast money, quick respect, and constant danger. He was smart enough to know which one promised survival in the short term. The older boys, men really, took him under their wing. They gave him tasks: hold this, deliver that, watch the corner, don't ask questions. For every risk, there was a reward. $10 here, $20 there. For a kid who used to count pennies to buy a sandwich, it felt like wealth. But that money disappeared quickly, swallowed by bills, groceries, and the never-ending emergencies that came with living paycheck to paycheck. And it left something behind, a hunger for more. At home, his mother could see it. She'd glance at him across the dinner table, his shoulders broader, his eyes sharper, his hands restless. She'd ask questions he never answered. "Where are you getting this money, Marcus? Who are you running with?" He'd shrug. He'd change the subject. Sometimes he'd storm off, angry that she didn't understand. Deep down, though, he knew she did. 17 was the year Marcus crossed the line. It started with a boy named Darren, charismatic, flashy, and just a year older. Darren had a car, girls, clothes Marcus had only seen in magazines. To Marcus, he seemed untouchable. Darren whispered promises. "Stick with me, man. I'll show you how to really make money. No more scraping by, we'll be set." Marcus believed him. At first it was harmless enough. Small errands, fast runs, little hustles. Then it escalated. They started targeting stores, then houses. Marcus's nerves burned every time, but Darren's confidence kept him going. One night, Darren planned something bigger. "It's easy money," he said. "A quick in and out, nobody gets hurt." It wasn't a corner store this time, it was a pawn shop. The night of the job, Marcus's stomach churned. He thought of his mother asleep in their apartment, exhausted from another double shift. He thought of the boy who once walked into a bookstore mesmerized by knowledge. But then he thought of the eviction notices piling up, the empty fridge, the way his mom's hands trembled from exhaustion. He went. The plan unraveled quickly. The shop owner was there. Words turned into shouts. Shouts turned into panic. Darren pulled a gun Marcus didn't know he had. The sound of the gunshot split the air, deafening and final. Marcus froze. His body felt like it was no longer his own. He saw the shop owner crumple, bleeding but alive, screaming for help. The sirens came fast. Darren ran. Marcus didn't. By the time he moved, it was too late. The flashing lights painted him in red and blue. The weight of the cuffs crushed his wrists. The words of the officer still echoed in his ears. "Armed robbery. You're done, kid." The trial was a blur. His public defender did what he could, but the evidence was overwhelming. The gun belonged to Darren, but Marcus had been there. He had been part of it. And the law didn't care about hesitation or regret. The prosecutor painted him as another statistic, a boy from the projects who had chosen crime, a future menace to society. His mother sat in the courtroom every day, her face pale, her hands trembling. Marcus couldn't look at her. When the verdict came, guilty, her cry pierced his heart more than the sentence itself. 10 years. Marcus Reed, barely 18, was going to prison. The first time Marcus walked into the prison yard, he understood fear in a way he never had before. The walls loomed high, topped with barbed wire that shimmered in the sun like teeth. The smell of sweat, metal, and despair clung to the air. The guards barked orders. The inmates stared, some with curiosity, some with hunger, some with a cold calculation that made his skin crawl. Prison wasn't just confinement. It was a different world, with its own rules, its own hierarchies, its own dangers. Respect was currency. Weakness was blood in the water. The first week, Marcus barely slept. The clang of doors, the shouts echoing down the corridors, the fights that erupted without warning. It was constant chaos. He learned quickly to keep his head down, his eyes forward, and his back against the wall. But even then, he couldn't avoid trouble. One afternoon in the cafeteria, a man twice his size shoved him, testing him. Marcus reacted without thinking, fists flying. The fight ended with Marcus bloodied, bruised, and thrown into solitary confinement. Sitting alone in that cold, windowless cell, he broke. For the first time, he let himself cry. Not the angry tears of a teenager, but the hollow sobs of someone who had lost everything. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. Prison stripped Marcus of time, of identity. He was no longer Marcus Reed. He was inmate 44216. Letters from his mother arrived less frequently. He knew why. She worked more hours, carried more weight, and couldn't bear the sight of her son behind bars. He wrote back every chance he got, pouring guilt and love into every word. But the silence between letters grew longer. And then, one day, the silence became permanent. It was a guard who told him. His mother had collapsed at work, her body giving out after years of exhaustion. She was gone. The news shattered him. He didn't scream. He didn't cry. He just sat on his bunk, staring at the wall, the words echoing in his head. She died while I was in here. All those promises he made to her, all the dreams he had whispered as a child, gone. He had failed her in every way. For weeks he wandered the prison like a ghost. He stopped eating. He stopped talking. He stopped caring. The fire inside him, the one that had pushed him to survive, flickered out. It might have ended there, Marcus fading into another lost soul swallowed by the system. But fate, or maybe something greater, had other plans. One evening, while sitting alone in the yard, an older inmate approached. His name was Elijah. a man in his 50s with graying hair and calm eyes that seemed out of place in the chaos of prison. "You're walking around like you're already dead," Elijah said, his voice steady. Marcus didn't respond. Elijah sat beside him. "I've seen 100 kids like you, angry, lost, ready to give up. But you're not dead yet. And until you are, you've got a choice," Marcus scoffed. "What choice? My life's over. I'm a convict, that's it." Elijah shook his head. "Your life's not over unless you decide it is. You've still got time. You can waste it, or you can use it." Those words lodged in Marcus's mind, no matter how hard he tried to shake them. Over the next weeks, Elijah kept showing up. He pushed books into Marcus's hands, autobiographies, business guides, philosophy. At first, Marcus ignored them. But slowly, curiosity won. He cracked open the pages. He read about men who had failed and risen again. He read about ideas, about discipline, about building something from nothing. For the first time in years, Marcus felt something stir inside him again. A spark. Elijah became his mentor. He taught Marcus how to survive prison, not just physically, but mentally. "Discipline," Elijah said, "is freedom. You control yourself, or this place controls you." Marcus started small, waking up early, doing push-ups in his cell, reading an hour every day, writing down thoughts in a notebook. At first it felt pointless, but over time he noticed the change. His body grew stronger, his mind clearer, his spirit steadier. He began to imagine something he hadn't dared in years, a future. But the question lingered, heavy as ever. Would he ever get the chance to live it? Prison was still prison. The walls still loomed, the locks still clanged, and the violence still simmered beneath every glance. But inside Marcus Reed, something subtle had shifted. It started with the books. Elijah had a way of pressing them into his hands with a quiet insistence. At first, Marcus treated them like weights, heavy things to carry but not to open. Yet loneliness has a way of loosening even the hardest defenses. One night, unable to sleep, he opened a biography Elijah had given him, about a man who had risen from poverty to lead nations. The story didn't feel foreign. It felt like a mirror, though warped and distant. The man in the book had fought battles of his own, carried scars Marcus understood in his bones. Marcus read until the words blurred, and for the first time in years his mind drifted not to the mistakes of his past, but to the possibilities of his future. Elijah's lessons went beyond books. "Routine is everything," Elijah told him one morning in the yard. "This place is designed to break you, but if you build habits, you build armor." So Marcus built armor. He woke before the morning count, dropped to the cold floor of his cell, and forced his body through push-ups until his arms shook. He ran laps in the yard, ignoring the jeers of others. He ate with intention, even when the food was slop. At first, the other inmates mocked him, called him professor, preacher, robot. But slowly, mockery turned into respect. Men who once dismissed him began to nod when he passed, recognizing the strength in his discipline. And more importantly, Marcus began to respect himself. Still, the grief of his mother's death lingered like a weight he could never drop. Every page he read, every push-up he did, every note he scribbled in his worn notebook, it was all for her now. "I promised you I'd make you proud," he'd whisper into the silence of his cell. "I failed you once. Never again." That pain became fuel. It burned away excuses. It hardened his resolve. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the prison walls, Elijah shared his own story. "I wasn't so different from you," Elijah said, his voice low. "Came in young, thought I knew everything. I wasted years, decades. By the time I realized I could be more, most of my life was gone. Don't make my mistake, Marcus. Don't wait until it's too late." Marcus studied him. The calm eyes, the steady posture, the dignity that prison hadn't stripped away. He realized Elijah wasn't just teaching him how to survive. He was handing him a gift, the chance to live differently. It was Elijah who told him to start writing. Your mind is full of noise, he said. Writing clears it. It also reminds you who you are and who you want to be. At first, Marcus scribbled random thoughts, anger, regret, memories. Slowly, those words turned into reflections, then plans, then dreams. He wrote about the business ideas he learned from books. He wrote about the kind of man he wanted to be. He wrote about building something that would last beyond him. One night, after filling a page with goals, he stared at the words until tears blurred them. I will change, I will build, I will give back. It wasn't just ink on paper. It was a vow. Transformation wasn't smooth. Fights still erupted. Temptation still circled. Some inmates laughed at his dreams. Others tried to drag him back into old habits. There were days Marcus wanted to quit, to let the darkness swallow him again. But every time, Elijah was there. Sometimes with words, sometimes with silence, sometimes with nothing more than a steady gaze that said, I believe in you, even when you don't. And slowly, Marcus found his footing. Prison had programs, though most ignored them. GED classes, vocational training, even a small library. Marcus, once the boy who drifted through school, became a student again. He studied math, business, and history. He asked questions. He read voraciously. Guards and teachers noticed. Some mocked him, but others offered help. One volunteer teacher, a retired businessman, saw Marcus's hunger and slipped him extra reading materials. Books on economics, investing, entrepreneurship. Marcus devoured them. The prison library became his sanctuary. Rows of books replaced the corners of his old neighborhood. Ideas replaced street codes. Knowledge replaced fear. Halfway through his sentence, Marcus faced his hardest test. A gang inside the prison wanted him. They offered protection, status, and access. When he refused, they turned on him. One night, Marcus was ambushed in the showers. 3 men, fists and shanks, ready to remind him of the cost of walking a different path. He fought back, but he was outnumbered. By the time guards broke it up, his body was battered, his ribs bruised. Lying in the infirmary bed, Marcus thought about giving up. Why fight so hard to change in a place designed to crush you? But then he remembered his mother's face, Elijah's words, his own vows written in that notebook. He clenched his fists through the pain. I won't stop. Not here. Not now. That night was his crucible. He emerged not weaker but sharper, more determined. As the years passed, Marcus's transformation deepened. He completed his GED. He took every class available. He kept writing, filling notebook after notebook with ideas, lessons, and visions of the life he would build. And most importantly, he planned. He knew the odds were against him. Ex-cons struggled to find jobs, let alone build businesses. But Marcus wasn't the same boy who once dreamed vaguely of being rich. He had a plan now, step by step, brick by brick. Save every dollar he could upon release. Start small. Any business, any hustle. Build trust, build reputation, build momentum. And then one day give back. Help kids like the boy he once was. Save them before they made his mistakes. 10 years is a lifetime. By the time Marcus walked out of those gates, the world had changed. Technology had leapt forward. Neighborhoods had shifted. His youth was gone. But so was the boy who had once walked into those gates in chains. He was lean, disciplined, educated, and determined. His heart was scarred, but it beat with purpose. As the sun hit his face for the first time as a free man, Marcus whispered the words he had written countless times in his notebook. I will change, I will build, I will give back. And with that, his second life began. Freedom is supposed to feel like flying. But for Marcus Reed, stepping outside those prison gates felt heavy. The air was different, open, unfiltered, alive with smells and sounds he hadn't tasted in a decade. Cars zipped past. People hurried by with phones in their hands, earbuds in their ears. Billboards flashed ads for things he didn't recognize. 10 years had passed, and Marcus felt like a ghost dropped into a world that had forgotten him. He had no car, no home, no money. Only a small duffel bag with his notebooks and the clothes the state had given him. Freedom was not light. It was responsibility. Marcus's first days were a blur of rejections. He applied for jobs, warehouse work, construction, restaurants. Each time the forms asked the same dreaded question, "Have you ever been convicted of a felony?" He checked the box, and each time the interviews ended quickly. "Sorry, you're not a good fit. We'll call you if something opens up. We don't hire ex-cons." By the end of the first week, Marcus sat on a park bench staring at the city skyline, hunger gnawing at his stomach. His old neighborhood was only a bus ride away. He knew he could go back, make a call, and have money in his pocket by nightfall. But he also knew where that path led. He opened his notebook instead, flipping through the pages filled with his prison vows. His mother's face rose in his memory. Elijah's voice echoed, "Don't waste your second chance." So he kept walking. Eventually, Marcus found a job no one else wanted, washing dishes at a diner on the edge of town. The pay was terrible. The hours were long. But the owner, an older woman with sharp eyes, didn't care about his past. She cared that he showed up on time and worked hard. Marcus scrubbed plates until his hands cracked. He took extra shifts, stayed late, and saved every dollar he could. He lived small, tiny rented room, no luxuries, no distractions. Every night, after work, he pulled out his notebook and wrote plans, ideas, steps, and slowly, a vision began to take shape. Marcus noticed something at the diner. The owner struggled with deliveries. Boxes piled up in the wrong places, shipments arrived late, and no one seemed reliable. Marcus saw opportunity. Using the little money he had saved, he bought an old van. He started a delivery service offering cheap, fast runs for small businesses. At first, it was just him, driving all day, answering calls at night. But word spread. He was reliable, honest, on time. In a world where people doubted him, Marcus built his name on one thing: trust. Within a year, he had 2 vans, then 3. He hired other ex-cons, men who, like him, just needed someone to believe in them. It wasn't glamorous, it wasn't easy, but it was his. Marcus reinvested every dollar. He studied business books again, applied lessons from entrepreneurship guides, learned about logistics and operations. He diversified, adding cleaning services, then small-scale construction work. His company grew steadily, fueled not by flashy investors but by grit and reputation. Banks still turned him away. Landlords doubted him. Clients sometimes sneered when they learned his past. But Marcus didn't quit. Every rejection became fuel. Every doubt became motivation. And slowly, success grew undeniable. Recognition. 5 years after leaving prison, Marcus's company had expanded into 3 cities. He had dozens of employees, many of them men and women society had written off. Reporters started noticing. "Ex-con builds business empire," one headline read. At first, Marcus hated the label. He wanted to be seen as more than his past. But then he realized his past was the very thing that made his story powerful. He began speaking publicly, at schools, at community centers, even at prisons. He told young men the truth. "I wasted years chasing shortcuts. Don't do the same. If you want success, build it brick by brick, even when no one believes in you." His voice carried weight because he had lived it. Money came, stability came, respect came. But Marcus never forgot his vow. "I will give back." He founded a non-profit, dedicated to supporting kids from broken homes. The kind of kids who once stared at cracked ceilings wondering if the world had forgotten them. His organization provided mentorship, education, and job opportunities. He opened scholarships in his mother's name. He funded after-school programs in neighborhoods like the one he had grown up in. For Marcus, wealth wasn't the goal. Impact was. He wanted to be the hand reaching out, the voice saying, "You are not forgotten. You can rise." Years later, Marcus returned to the prison where he had once served his sentence, not as an inmate, but as a guest speaker. The guards who had once locked him up now shook his hand. The inmates watched in silence as he stood before them in a tailored suit, confidence radiating from him. He told them about Elijah, about the books, about the notebooks filled with dreams, about the pain of rejection, the grind of starting over, the discipline that saved him. And then he said, "Your mistakes don't define you. Your choices today do. I was sitting where you are now, and the world told me I was finished. But look at me. I'm proof you can change, you can rise. And when you do, don't just rise for yourself, rise for others." The room erupted in applause. Some men wept. Marcus felt his own eyes burn. In that moment, he realized he had fulfilled his promise to his mother. He had built a life not just worth living, but worth giving. Marcus Reed's story is not just about wealth. It's about resilience. It's about refusing to be defined by your worst moment. It's about discipline, vision, and the relentless belief that even broken beginnings can lead to extraordinary endings. Imagine if Marcus had given up in that cell. Imagine if he had surrendered to bitterness or gone back to old streets after his release. His story would have ended there, but instead he chose differently. And that's the lesson for all of us. No matter where you are, no matter what you've lost, no matter how many people doubt you, your story isn't finished. As Marcus proved, your rags don't define you. Your choices, your resilience, your heart, that's what builds riches. So ask yourself, what vow will you make today? What dream will you write down? What brick will you lay, one at a time, until the world can no longer deny your rise? Because maybe, just maybe, your own rags to riches story is waiting to be written. Success, once a distant fantasy scribbled in a prison notebook, had become Marcus Reed's reality. But unlike the boys he grew up with, who once equated making it with flashy cars or quick cash, Marcus's definition of success evolved. To him, wealth was not in what he wore or drove. It was in the lives he touched. His nonprofit grew from a small community program into a national initiative. What started as tutoring sessions in church basements and borrowed classrooms became full-fledged youth centers, bright, safe spaces where kids could study, train, and dream. Each center bore his mother's name. The Lillian Reed Foundation for Hope. At the ribbon cutting of the first center, Marcus stood before a crowd of children and parents. His voice caught as he said, "My mother believed I could be more, even when I didn't. These doors are open because of her love, and because I want every child here to know, you matter, you are capable, and your story is not defined by where you start." Marcus's work wasn't abstract. It was visible in the kids themselves. There was Devin, a shy teenager from Marcus's old neighborhood who nearly dropped out of school. With mentorship and a scholarship, he not only graduated, but became the first in his family to attend college. There was Mariah, whose parents battled addiction. She found refuge in the Foundation's programs and later returned as a counselor, guiding kids through the very storms she once survived. There was Jamal, a boy Marcus personally mentored. Jamal once reminded Marcus of himself at 15, angry, restless, one step from falling into the streets. Years later, Jamal stood at the podium of his own graduation ceremony and said, "If not for Mr. Reed, I'd be in prison. Instead, I'm here, free, with a future." These weren't statistics. They were lives redirected. Proof that Marcus's vow, "I will give back," was alive in every smile, every diploma, every second chance. With time, Marcus's story spread. He was invited to speak at conferences, honored with humanitarian awards, and even featured on national television. Journalists framed him as the prisoner who became a philanthropist, but Marcus always deflected the spotlight. "This isn't about me," he would say. "It's about possibility. If I can change, anyone can. If I can rise, so can you." Still, his humility only made people respect him more. Celebrities donated to his foundation. Politicians sought his counsel on prison reform. Universities awarded him honorary degrees. For a boy once told he'd never be more than a statistic, it was a kind of vindication. But Marcus carried it lightly. Fame wasn't his destination. Service was. One day, Marcus received news that Elijah, the mentor who had guided him in prison, was gravely ill. Marcus rushed to the hospital, finding his old friend frail but still sharp-eyed. "You kept your promise," Elijah whispered, smiling weakly. You didn't waste your second chance. Tears filled Marcus's eyes as he clasped Elijah's hand. I owe it all to you. You showed me a different way. Elijah shook his head. No, Marcus. I only lit a match. You carried the flame. Days later, Elijah passed. At his funeral, Marcus spoke not of sorrow, but of legacy. One man's wisdom changed my life, he told the mourners. Now it's my duty to carry that wisdom forward, to light the way for others. And in his heart, Marcus knew Elijah's spirit lived on in every life he touched. Amid his philanthropy, Marcus built a personal life too. He married a woman who shared his passion for service, and together they raised children grounded not in wealth, but in compassion. At home, Marcus was not the businessman, not the philanthropist, not the headline. He was simply a father, telling bedtime stories, attending school plays, and teaching his children the lessons life had carved into him: humility, resilience, kindness. One evening, his daughter asked, "Daddy, were you really in prison?" Marcus paused, then nodded. Yes, but prison isn't who I am. It's where I learned who I could be. She thought about that, then smiled. Then I'm glad you went, because it made you you. Marcus felt a lump in his throat. Out of the mouths of children came truths even he sometimes struggled to see. Decades passed. Marcus's businesses flourished. His foundation expanded across states. Thousands of young people found mentorship, scholarships, and second chances because of him. But Marcus never stopped visiting prisons. Every time he entered those cold, familiar halls, memories surged. Yet he stood tall, not as an inmate, but as proof of what was possible. He told the men behind bars the same thing over and over. Your past does not erase your future. You can build again. But you have to decide. No one can do it for you. Some ignored him. Some scoffed. But others, eyes weary yet searching, listened. And for them, Marcus knew, a seed had been planted. In his later years, Marcus sat on the porch of his home overlooking a garden his wife had planted. He held one of his old prison notebooks, yellowed, worn, filled with vows and dreams written in a trembling young man's hand. He thought of the boy he once was, angry, lost, hungry for belonging. He thought of the man who entered prison in chains and walked out in hope. He thought of his mother, whose love still guided him. He thought of Elijah, whose wisdom had steered him. And he smiled. He had kept his vow. I will change. I will build. I will give back. Those words had carried him from a cell to a legacy. Marcus Reed's story isn't just his own. It's a mirror for anyone who feels trapped by their beginnings, crushed by their mistakes, or forgotten by the world. Because his life proves something vital. Hardship does not define destiny. Failure does not forbid triumph. Poverty, prison, pain. These are chapters, not conclusions. The real story is written in the choices you make when the world doubts you most. So as you listen to Marcus's journey, ask yourself, what is my vow? What flame will I carry? Because somewhere out there, someone is waiting for you to rise, so that you can help them rise too. And maybe, just maybe, your own rags to riches story is already beginning.